And I'm going to see what goes on. Okay, there, it's appearing on my other screen here. It should appear on that computer. And it's possible to be live right now. I think we actually are. So I better stop waffling and just actually get on with the situation here. So yeah, let me just make this screen small, because I don't think I want to see myself talking in some delay. And we should appear on that computer over there. I trust that that's going to happen. So anyway, Jonty, I'm going to start. We are live. Are we live? We are live. So welcome to tonight's coffee in the studio. Jonty, do you have any coffee? Or are you drinking tea, or what's going on over there?
Coffee is happening.
You're lucky. It's nighttime here, so I'm trying to be responsible and only have tea. So before we do anything else, I must acknowledge the fact. Okay, so first of all, there's probably a few people. I don't know who's watching this, but I think hopefully some people from our joint childhood, and quite a few people hopefully outside of Australia. So what I'm about to do now might seem a little strange, a little quirky, but it's actually not. It's actually an amazing tradition that we do here in Australia, because we acknowledge that we are doing these things. Like, I'm sitting in my garage in a part of Sydney called Maroubra, and quite simply, this is ancient land. This land has been inhabited by sophisticated populations of indigenous people for the last 30,000 years. A couple of hundred years ago, it was essentially colonized, but it's still very much essentially Aboriginal land. And it's really an important tradition that we acknowledge that. So I want to acknowledge that I'm doing this broadcast from Gadigal country. So the people of Gadigal, people of the Eora Nation, their elders past, present, and emerging, I want to acknowledge them really importantly, because it's the oldest culture that we have on this planet. And probably the first artists and scientists, came from that. Scientific and artistic thinking came from that place. So I really want to acknowledge that. Now, so what this is conversations usually between artists and scientists. So there's usually three of us here. Jonty seems to have a third person, but that third person is actually also just himself. So it doesn't technically count. We still only have two people. I have a pseudonym, Sid Sledge, so maybe there are four of us here tonight, Jonty. But the point is that it's conversations between artists and scientists. And what that really means is that I'm really interested in exploring that space between art and science. So I started I rediscovered science through art. I rediscovered science through art. And I've now become really passionate about exploring that interface. And then, let me just, one sec, sorry, I'm just going to just zoom, I'm just going to move up here. Yeah, okay, you see that picture there. So that picture is a picture taken by our friend Janine Wolfson, who was in our class, and she photographed us, and I think we were probably about 10 years old there. And essentially, it's a picture of myself as we are so 10 years old, and there's me on the left, Stephen, and Jonty on the right. I'm, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm staring off the distance. Not much has changed. And Jonty, you can see these wild, curious eyes. And there again, not much has changed. And for some reason, growing up in that little town, we both grew up to have a passion for science, but then somehow art came into the story. So that's really something I really want to explore, is what was in the water growing up in Pretoria that made us take on this trajectory. But before we do that, I must introduce Jonty to those who formerly don't know who he is. Now, Jonty is a rock star of the art world. He really is. He's been equated by a critic has called him the modern day Leonardo da Vinci, where he's taken, he's developed his art practice by using the tools available to him. And those tools are people of many different diverse disciplines and skill sets. And he uses these to very passionately and very deeply personally, with a lot of heart, there's a lot of emotion in his work, bring that to people. So we're going to talk about what that is. That is very briefly who he is. He's, if you can look him up on TED. He's got a fantastic talk on one of the TED Talks at the Stuttgart TED, right? Jonty, I think it's in Stuttgart a couple of years ago, which is definitely worth looking at. But now I'm going to have a little go before we talk to Jonty. I want to put Jonty, I've decided to sort of like take on art history, right? Like, where does Jonty fit in the history of art? And I was thinking about this morning while walking my technician OJ around the area, and I thought, and I think I've thought this for a while, but Jonty's work is really about perception, about how we see ourselves in the world. All right. Now, this is a long history, and I think we can take it all the way back to the first cave painting, where a person, a human, transcribed some image on the wall and suddenly had this realization that they're a thing in the world. That's a profound moment of awareness. And they can hold themselves as a symbol, as something in the world, symbolically. That is a profound moment. I think the next big jump, and this is all following a trajectory to where Jonty is now. The next big jump for me, at any rate, is probably the Renaissance, okay? Where suddenly, I've got an image here. Let's take a look at that image there. Suddenly there came this idea about point of view, perspective. Was perspective invented or was it discovered? This idea that we could now place ourselves in the world and actually consider the world, look into the world. It must have been a very shocking moment when people first saw these paintings where you can see three-dimensional perspective, in other words, shown from the point of view of the viewer. Now you have to understand that's a huge thing. Before then, all painting was essentially religious. It was about celebrating God. And now it was about, we are in the world. We are important in the world. And look, we can look at it from our own points of view. We can have a point of view. And that's a very profound moment. And then the next big jump is actually then to say, and I think, you can maybe say quantum physics had a lot to do with that. Suddenly, what we see is not necessarily what is there. Okay, that's a very powerful statement. What we see in front of us might not be what is actually there. We might be framed or bamboozled by the way our brain interprets information. And that, for me, Jonty, is where your work sits. You've challenged the idea of how we see ourselves and how we reflect ourselves in the world. So that's really where I want to bring you in, Jonty. We are now just going to actually reminisce a bit, talk about our life back in Pretoria, talk about art and science, because both Jonty and I are artists and scientists, but I think we actually come from very different schools of thought on that. So Jonty, maybe I can just to spring things off. Let's even talk about our life in Pretoria, your first earliest memories of maybe even of what made you want to go into science. Where did that spark come from? And welcome. It's so amazing just to hang out with you.
Well, Steve, just to say, so great. This is just so beautiful and spiritual and deep on so many levels. To be hanging out as 50-year-old men together after all these years. It's just so heartwarming. And so I did a deep dive into exploring what the thread might be, where it all started, digging through all of these old memories. I also then, as part of that process, dug through a box of old Super 8s that my parents had taken, goodness knows when, in the 70s, right? At some point in the 70s. And I actually found a video of you and I in the 70s. It's like, it's 30 seconds. So I'm just going to share that, if that's okay. Because I think that is okay. That could be part of where it all started, right? Are you ready for this?
All right, let's see if we can work it out.
Okay, I'm just going to share. There we've got old Wayne Kayser.
Is that Hilton? I think that's Hilton over there.
There's Hilton.
Oh my gosh.
There's Eric.
There's you.
Dan. Russell. Okay, and get ready for it.
Oh, wait a minute.
There you are.
Oh, that's actually that's my 10-year-old. What's Eric doing? That's my 10-year-old son, Ruben. That's just appeared in front of the screen over there.
There we go. That's me, man, at 10 years old.
Oh my gosh. Can we get a clue from that? Are there clues?
Well, You were going like this.
I was doing that. I was doing that. I wonder what that means. That is amazing to see. And there's, I think it's Hilton behind there. So
Yeah.
so how old were we in that video?
Probably got goodness 10 years old. So anyway, I just thought that was a
That's amazing.
start.
That is amazing.
Do you know what, Steve? You asked what was in the question you posed in the thing was what was in the water,
Which I didn't think was a literal question, but yes.
Exactly. And so as I mentioned to you, I decided to actually go and find out what was in the water.
Of course you did.
And I'm just gonna share it. So this is the South African water contents in comparison to the World Health Organization limits, and it's just a really interesting analysis of the water contents in South Africa. And I won't put you all through it, but there are two really notable things here. Our water was incredibly high in ammonia.
Right.
But more importantly, we had and continue to have 7 times the nickel content of anyone else in the world.
Right.
And nickel is radioactive. And so obviously there's a little bit of radioactive energy that we've been consuming for, we consume all the way through our childhood.
I'll take
rather high levels of radioactivity.
Yeah.
And then I don't know what this says, right? But I went in and I had a look at what it means. So I found out about the radioactivity, but then I hit a couple of like hippie, what's the meaning of different metals, and people say that nickel can act as a negative energy detoxifier, and if you're suffering from compulsive thoughts or dream, nickel can help purge your mind of them. But most importantly, wearing nickel encourages creativity and lightness of spirit. Now,
well, that's it then.
I don't know who wrote this. It's like, it could be fake news. It's on some like crystal site.
Jonty, it suits
that's odd.
It suits our narrative to believe that we've consumed excessive amounts of stuff that made us creative. So I'm going to take that. The scientist in me is going to acknowledge the correctness of that information, and I'm going to run with it. I'm absolutely going to run with it. Actually, I just suddenly realized can you see what's going on in YouTube? Because I can't, for some reason, I'm unable to see what's going on YouTube, so I can't see any questions. If people who are there, are you able to see it?
I can hit the YouTube site and check if you like.
Because I'm struggling to see it, and I don't know why. But you see, I'm thinking a couple of people might ask us some questions. It'll be good to field those. I don't know why my computer's being suddenly, I'm of the two of us, I was not the technologically adept one. Can you see it in there?
Yeah, so it is live. It is live.
Wonderful. Okay, so you can see that. Okay, and I know I'm mentioning the professional one here who's managing this whole situation, but if a question pops up there that looks really great, please feel free to address it. I'm putting the ball in your court here. So Jonty, I want to know, like, why did you? Can you track back to what took you into a scientific direction? What made you interested in science?
I look back on those years now.
Yeah.
And I read an interesting book by Malcolm Gladwell. I wish I could remember the name. I can't. A while ago, and Malcolm was talking about exposure as being a really big, an important part of people's childhoods. The kind of exposure you have and how that ultimately impacts. And I mean, I look back on myself in those years, and it probably didn't seem like it, and I wasn't really communicating it, but I bought one of the original Apple computers, and I was spending goodness knows how many hours every day. I mean, a vast portion of my life I was coding, I was working with data. I was like, that was basically my life at the time.
Okay.
And, you know, as children, we all had those private lives out of school. We all went home at 2 o'clock, and I would spend every day sitting at my computer coding from the age of 13. And so I think kind of my relationship with data, with big data and with coding started at a very young age. I always knew I was going to be, I was an engineer. I always knew I was an engineer. And at the same time, I was super busy with computer games. And I think computer games, even in those days, straddled that beautiful line between science and art. You know, you were using this kind of geeky thing of coding, this very rigid way of thinking, and trying to manifest it into something creative and arty and inspiring and interesting. And so I directly trace my inspiration back to computer games.
That's interesting, because I think if I track mine back, there were two things that happened to me. I think it was also very much about growing up in South Africa. You know, when you grow up in South Africa, it's quite conservative, obviously. You know, and it's religiously conservative. Yeah, I mean, it's religiously conservative, it's politically conservative. So and I remember getting this book when I turned 13, ironically, by my bar mitzvah. This was a mistake. So for my bar mitzvah, I was given this book called Life on Earth by David Attenborough. And in it, there were these pictures where it showed what the world must have looked like 300 million years ago. And for a child who's just had a bar mitzvah, so it's meant to now be, you know, following a religious dogma more accurately. I saw these images of what the world looked like 300 million years ago. I thought, that world looks so much more interesting than the world that I currently live in. I want to know about that world. So I think, and then I saw another image when I was about a year later in a biology class, where I saw the embryo of a human next to a chicken, next to a fish. And I'm obsessed with fish and chickens. I mean, I don't know.
Oh, tell me about it.
And they all, now this is the clinker. They all look the same. All right.
Yeah.
So in that moment, I thought, there's this incredible connection between living forms on this planet, and I want to know about that. That's what I wanted to devote my life to. So that's what took me on my life to science. I think.
Do you know, I've actually got something to share with you on this point as well. You're not going to believe this, right?
No.
But actually, one of the things that another thing that set me off on my kind of scientific path, and actually to this day, Steve, you don't know how much I think about this. It's really weird. Like when you proposed this conversation, I kind of found it quite weird, because, do you know, I remember being about 10, 11 years old at your house. And incidentally, I'm not just saying this for the show. Really, genuinely, this influenced me massively.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting at the table with you and your sister, and your mom brought out a beautiful, like, maybe a cottage pie or something like that, piping hot in a Pyrex dish. Yeah. And as we were about to take the cottage pie out of the Pyrex dish, because of the heat, the Pyrex dish exploded. I don't know if you remember this moment. It was like, you know, literally an explosion.
You said it, as you said it, as you were about to say it, I had I think, and who knows how the brain works, but I did have this sudden, oh my God, I do remember that. Like, I actually think I remember that. A white Pyrex dish.
Exactly. And it just
it must have been a cottage pie, because that's almost all we had.
And you know, for years, I questioned what made that Pyrex dish explode. And actually, I think that's part of my, you know, that physics questioning. I just found that whole experience so fascinating. Why at that point did it explode? And the cottage pie just sitting there, and the pieces of Pyrex all over the table. And it was a really important moment in my science journey.
I actually love that story, because a thing that I'm obsessed with, because I make these machines, they have these catastrophic points. Like everything does. Everything has this point in its existence, especially if it's kinetic or dynamic, where it's literally going to die, you know? And I've had my machines doing that in very awkward moments of performing. But I love it when they do it, because it's like saying, yes, I'm a thing in the world that's kinetic, and yes, I die. And you don't know when that moment is. It could be now, it could be in 5, it could just, you don't know what that point is. And I find that actually something around the uncertainty of it quite beautiful, like quite a beautiful idea. So maybe, I wonder if that Pyrex dish had something to do with that.
Well, maybe you know, like I always question this idea, because I love your chaos machines. And actually, I've seen a video, I seem to recall, where it's all kind of in this chaotic order, and then at some point the whole thing just like flies off the table for no apparent reason.
No apparent reason.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe that chaotic moment that happened then, because you can look, this is something that I'm thinking about quite a lot at the moment, is not only the actual chaotic moment in the physical universe, and this is coming into that relationship between artists and scientists, but when that moment of chaos or entropy explosion, or whatever you want to call, how it influences the observer, you know, because you're part of that event, you know. So you seeing that chaos moment happen, you've created a machine that kind of forces those events, or that Pyrex moment that happened, and the influence that moment had on me, and then going forward, the influence that chaotic moment had on the world as a result of the influence that it had on me. It's quite an amazing thought, the power, like how that energy goes far beyond just the physical energy that we measure in science.
And there's our response to it. Like, it becomes a very human response, you know? Like, you can consider it as an engineer or a scientist, but it's actually a thing breaking in front of you. And it's actually quite a tender thing. Like, I've had an experience where I was working with some scientists at the CSIRO, and my machine was being very temperamental, because that's what they are. And a group of them very quietly and gently came and tried to support it. And in that moment, it sort of became something else, became something far more beautiful than what it was before. It was being temperamental. And that's something outside of control. I love that idea of something being, you know, we can try and control things, but ultimately we are out of control. We don't have control. And the universe is sometimes there to teach us that we don't have control. And it's there to teach us a more profound lesson, maybe about surrendering to something beyond ourselves. Like, it's about the beyond ourselves.
The question comes up, if it's beyond ourselves, and we surrender to that, we're, you know, you're referring to some kind of emotional scale of surrender and acceptance, but then I look at the physics of it for a moment, and I go, where is that energy, that extreme energy in our equations of physics at the moment? That extreme energy of surrender, and the impact that it has on you now. And you think about yourself as an energy burning machine. I mean, just to put this in perspective, I've heard, this could be fake news, I'm having fake news anxiety at the moment. But that we burn per kilogram more energy than the sun, a human being. Interestingly enough, that please check that fact. I'd love some feedback.
I would think that if anybody does, Jonty, you do. The way your mind works, that wouldn't surprise me. If
but so you think about the energy burnt in having the emotional reaction. And that energy is not coming into our equations of conservation of energy. Like, actually, our physics is so limited at the moment to like this very closed observational space that we have, but actually it's so much bigger than that. And actually, in the Kabbalah, they talk about every decision you make having enough energy to ripple through 7 generations.
Right. Well, look, there's something definitely beyond what the physicists can deal with. I mean, the physicists have to deal with a small, idealized system. And I'm actually reading this book right now. Of course, I'll never be able to find it, but give me 1 second. There's this one.
Steve, I love the jacket, by the way. I'm looking very sharp.
I bought it
very sharp today.
And I walked past the second-hand jacket shop. I saw it. I think I'm a plaid jacket guy. I bought it. So
I
anyway,
think there's a bit of South African influence there.
maybe
I mean,
it's like a corporate
we had
op.
to wear jackets to school.
I just started wearing jackets and hats late in life. This book here, he writes about physics, like biological systems, like almost the engineering of wings. You know how biology engineers wings, how we have to think about them. And he makes that point. I think along the lines of what you made, is that we literally, physics gives up at a certain point. It doesn't want to try and describe the soft, squishy stuff, or the stuff that extends beyond the boundaries of the frames of reference, because it's just too hard. So it doesn't engage with it. And I think it's where art can be quite profound, is because art, you in that moment were prepared to allow yourself to have that thought. And I think if you were a physicist or an engineer, you wouldn't have allowed yourself to have that thought, because it's not measurable.
No, you're right. It's not measurable. It's an interesting thing. Although I think more and more it's becoming a lot of these things that we define as soft are becoming much more tangible and measurable as we enter into this new era in our evolution. I do think that they're becoming more measurable. We're starting to understand the brain a lot better. We're starting to understand the science of emotions. We're starting to understand the energy levels involved in generating emotions, and the relationship between food and consumption, and the creation of energy and the firing of neurons, and how those neurons create what we used to call as soft. I think part of the challenge that we're all facing now is that what the art world assumed to be soft is not necessarily so soft anymore.
The science world or the art world?
The art world, for example, emotions. I mean, I come back to my fascination, big data. Let's take big data as an example, and how that soft thing about how you feel. How do I make you feel? That used to be soft, and now Facebook and Google have a science. They've got a science, right? They want to make you feel like you need to buy something.
Right.
They can do it with an algorithm, and so I think those boundaries between physics and the soft stuff that we used to associate with art are being broken at incredible speed.
So Jonty, this is now the moment, because I mean, you've got to, like, I'm sitting at, and this conversation, I think we have to now look at some of your work, because now what you're touching on now is, I think, where your art sits. It's about those perceptions, and about it's about somehow getting from this big data to how we feel, to an emotional response, to a perception. Can you think, can we get a segue out of this moment into the work that maybe you're currently doing, or how you think now about yourself as an artist?
Sure. Well, I'm going to share with you, actually, I'm just going to pause this for a second. Let me share with you what I'm working on right now.
Awesome.
And this is a whole new area for me. It's a new area of mathematics, and inspired by some incredible people that I met, mathematicians, geometrical mathematicians that I met at a university in Italy. Really incredible. The team behind a piece of software called MeshLab. And so I discovered their mathematical capability, which was so far beyond mine. And I think and you do this a lot as well. I think our field, this whole notion of the lone artist sitting in their studio, it's quite a flawed one in a way. I think that in this world that we live in now, that's so super specialized, collaboration is such an essential part of what we need to do, and so
we need to get out.
You
need to get into the world. We need to be artists in the world.
Exactly. So I'll just share them with you. I've got a few in my studio here, but I'll just share this little video with you. So
can I just interrupt for a second? This is like I feel like we're just seeing a world premiere here. Is that fair to say? Oh, come on, this is incredible. Okay, so guys,
actually, I'm giving this world premiere with some anxiety, because I'm still working on the royalties, and so I can't actually put them live yet. And so this is like a little world premiere.
All right.
But yeah. And so I suppose the background of these is firstly that amazing mathematics, and then I decided to take the certain figures in my life that were a massive inspiration to me, that have defined my path. And this has all been kind of, I have to give credit to my amazing wife who's helped me work through this and worked on all of the, it's been so amazing. I work really closely with my wife now on all of the art, and actually talking about my art actually feels wrong now, because it's been such a joint journey, and my amazing engineering team is sitting in the studio. I feel wrong claiming credit for this, you know, but anyway, inspirations. And so I'll just share the video, and then it's a minute long.
Okay.
Sigmund Freud.
God.
Amy Winehouse, jazz.
Oh my gosh. That is extraordinary.
Albert Einstein.
Oh my gosh.
Relativity. And Nelson Mandela. Freedom.
Extraordinary, John. I love the way that one goes out of the cone into that surface. It's Jonty.
So,
you know, I think a lot of us wonder, where's Jonty? What are you going to do? You know, where are you going to go now? You know, and you always find some other pinnacle. You know, you go through something, you come up through some other extraordinary transition. That is incredible. I mean, I as I sit here, I'm an experimental biologist, so I go into the lab and I run some gels. It's quite primitive stuff, really. I look at that. And maths to me is like, I struggle with maths. Maths is something that I'm starting to understand a bit more. Now that I read somewhere that you can just hum the maths. You don't have to know it in great, you know, in its minuscule detail. But can you tell me a little bit about how? Okay, first of all, I'm going to take you. I want you to go back, because your first anamorphic work was also highly mathematical, data driven. How is it different from this? Like, is there a fundamental mathematical differentiation between that and what you're doing now?
Do you know what? Each one is a journey. Do you know? I try and look at the difference between all of them, and you know, the maths is only part. The maths is only part of it. You know, and none of this maths has been invented by me, and I can't claim you know, none of it's been invented by me. I think it's just kind of, you spoke about it when we kind of had the little pre-chat, you know, it's about like taking a concept, a piece of maths that I find fascinating, and then finding a way to execute that thing in the real world. So to take it out of the and I suppose this is what engineering is, actually. This is what engineering is all about, you know. It was always a joke at university, you know, the engineers don't invent any of the maths. The physicists invented, and the mathematicians, and often, funny enough, at university, the pure scientists are always quite critical of the engineers, you know, you guys are lightweight.
And the mathematicians think that the physicists can't do maths. So really, let's, you know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So let's not worry about that.
What engineering is about taking a piece of maths, understanding it, then implementing it in the real world and bringing that experience, you know. And so part of it is the actual raw execution of these ideas, and that's a really big journey. I mean, making those cones, you know, one of the things, for example, on these pieces that I realized was how delicate and how extreme the compression is on these pieces. And so making those cones to the right level of precision turned out to be, I thought it was going to be a 1-month project. 1 year later, and you know, God knows how many iterations.
Yeah, I must just for a second interrupt you, because it reminds me of when I worked at the CSIRO here. I went into a laboratory where they have the National Measurement Institute, And I looked at a
Yeah.
guy's data where his job, he's a physicist, was to polish a surface to the point where you could then use it as a measuring device for, I think it was the volt or something. And I was like literally blown away. It was angstroms, and it was like it's not trivial to get you think it's trivial because we see mirrors every day, but you realize it's really not a trivial thing. There's deep maths, deep physics, deep experimental stuff going on there to get it to that point.
And actually, Steve, you are so spot on. The huge crisis with these cones was the polishing.
Polishing, yeah.
Was the polishing, because ultimately when you come down to polishing, that's where there's this point where the maths and the reality collide with each other, right?
Yes.
And when it comes to polishing, there is only one way to polish, right? And it's like this. That's how you polish.
Plato. At some point, the idea hits the world, right?
Exactly. And the polishing with these cones was the real problem, because the polishing of the tip kind of, and I'm talking about microns, made the tip go like that. And so the end of the process was finding the right polisher, the right human being who could polish to the level of,
and that's not sexy. You know, when you say, no, the real difficulty of this work is to getting a who's good with polish.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
I appreciate it, because the guy showed me a folder this thick, and conference proceedings and publications that he published year after year to polish the surface. And you know LIGO, the thing that measured the gravitational wave, that was an exercise in polishing, getting those mirrors to do their refraction. Ironically, it was work done here at the CSIRO, but to get those surfaces so the refraction and reflection, or whatever it was going to hit the right angle, was completely critical to the success of these things. So
it all comes down to polish, really. A little bit of polish goes a long way.
Spit and polish. See, now that is extraordinary, because so that's the other thing I wanted to say about you, John, is the other thing I was thinking about today was, I was thinking we're so different in the way we think about art and science. I think we have a lot of simpatico and a lot of, but the work we do is quite different. And I decided, I made this decision today, so you have to go with it. You are one of Plato's descendants, all right? You're a descendant of Plato. You believe in the supremacy and the beauty of ideas, and that's what's in your eyes all those years ago, sitting at that desk in Pretoria in Standard 1. In your eyes is that you're looking for something, you're looking for that idea, and when you find it, you are going to do whatever it takes to realize the idea. I'm so not that. I have to make something, bumble it together, and then ask what is it, and then respond to it, and then make my own universe by discovering what it is that I've just done. And that's so I am one of Aristotle's. I'm one of Aristotle's great grandchildren.
The only reason I'm saying Aristotle is because you told me before. I'm not taking credit for that.
You stole my thunder there.
I didn't.
But I mean,
it's your thunder.
But seriously, so that is that's where science is for me. It's like there are two branches. There's the Platonics, who really believe that there's this, and to take it to an extreme, maybe this is something you can talk about. Underneath it all is an eternal idea that is so true that it is beyond dispute, and a lot of mathematicians. Where's that book? Can't find it. But Frank Wilczek, he got a Nobel Prize like 3 or 4 years ago. I mean, when I read it, I think he's a bit stark raving, not right. But actually, he's driven by this purity of an idea that's given him a lot of incredible physics. But I don't know if I don't know what it means to believe in a supreme idea underneath it all. Like that doesn't. Is that something that sits with you? Is that something that you can?
Well, it sits with me in the context of your work, because actually your work's been really inspirational to me. Those chaos machines. Well, there are on a couple of levels. Your work's been inspirational to me and influential. And I tell you, I've always loved and I've always struggled with, and actually used your work to try and guide me through that, with letting myself free as a creator, as an artist, seeing what comes out and then deriving the truth out of it, which is what you did so
Right.
much with, especially with your early art and also with your chaos machines. You kind of launch these things into the universe and then derive the knowledge through observation and the inspiration.
Okay.
Whereas exactly what you're saying, I sit there pre-planning the whole thing
Mm.
down to like 7 decimal places before
Mm.
I start. And so I totally resonate with what you're saying, Steve. I totally resonate with it. I think our approaches are very, very different, and yet somehow
Mm.
have the same intent, just approached from a very different way.
I think that's true.
That painting that you sent me all those years ago, which I
Yes.
can't tell you how much I appreciated it. Actually, I can't tell you. It's been up on the wall ever since I got it,
That's
and
right.
and 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 actually for me, it's been a really important idea because it's I've got a picture of it. I'm going to share it
Mm.
so everybody can see it.
Wow. That's a piece of Sid
Um,
history there.
yeah, that is a piece of Sid history. I'm gonna share it right now. Here, and
My word.
that work's been a real a guiding light for me because
Mm.
it's so unstructured and in a way so far from the way that I approach art. And I continually look at it and go, I need to become more like that. I need to loosen up.
Well, yeah,
and and you know what's really interesting, about 10 years ago, we got one of those lights in the bedroom, those lights where you dial a ring and and the light changes color. And this
uh,
has been in my son's bedroom.
right, right.
And the most amazing experience has been with my son for years while he was in bed, kind of changing the color of the light from a blue light to a green light to a red light, and looking at this painting and seeing how it becomes a fundamentally different piece
Wow.
of work in different lights.
Wow. That's such
And
an amazing, it's such an amazing story. And you see, I look at that painting and I think, oh, there's just too many ideas competing for supremacy in my head, and I haven't got the patience to carefully decide which one is the right one. So I'm just going to put them all down, let them fight it out on the canvas, and not be
well,
bothered.
I've got something else to share with you, man, for you as an artist. And so I told my son I was going online with you
Oh my
today,
God.
and
Yeah,
he decided to send you a little video.
no ways.
Sid, it's Cosmo. Just wanted to say, I still remember, being really young, maybe 5 or 6 years old, and seeing your painting in our hallway and just pondering what it all meant, what I was looking at, what I could see, yeah. And now I've got it in my room, and I still look at it a lot. Yeah. So yeah, I've grown up with your art, and I really like it.
God, Jonty, that is so special, that it, and that painting came out of quite a tumultuous period, like I was really just trying to figure out who I was as an artist, and it reminds you, and it reminds me too that loosening up is, but it's a tension, right? It's a tension between those two things. I mean, the work that you produce by painstakingly, draw out an idea is extraordinary work. It says extraordinary things. So it's the way you work, and I think maybe we do have these two aspects of ourselves where for some reason us human beings observe the world and try and make sense of it, but it's always in tension with some belief we hold. We try and measure it against some belief we hold, and on some level maybe a I wonder what it is about that belief. I mean, that's an interesting idea because it's not quite an idea, but we're always measuring something against
Totally.
a belief. And I haven't figured out what that belief is, but I know whenever I'm looking at or considering, when I'm looking at my chaos, I'm wondering if there's some order. I'm wondering if there's something in that chaos that is capable of making an ordered, beautiful thing that we can respond to emotionally. And if I look at the order, I wonder if so much order can make something that's not so ordered and not so regimental? Is there something in it? So everything I think we do is guided by a belief. And the great thing I think being an artist is we allow, and I think scientists do that too. I think great scientists believe. They have a belief. Like, I think Einstein was a great believer. Deep. It's so funny. I read a quote once where all that science is a domestication of religion. Where you have this, there's this great almighty, and and all but what does that mean? And then we've just tailored it down to categorize things and order things, but we're driven by a belief.
Totally. Actually, do you want to know something? I've actually created a piece of work called "What Do You Believe?" and it looks at the whole idea of death. I'm going to try and bring it up as I'm talking. I'm going to try and parallel process. That's not one of my main capabilities. Not one of my defining things.
I think if you just keep talking about your inability to parallel process, we'll come up with something.
I'm even struggling to talk about my ability to parallel process while doing something else at the same time.
Tell me, while you're busy parallel processing, are there any questions on YouTube that we should be answering? Have you found it?
Here we go. I found it, and I'm gonna share it on the screen now. Wonderful. But I'll just talk a little bit about it before I share it. The whole idea is it's called "What Do You Believe?" and it's all it looks at the idea of death. It's inspired by Holbein, who's one of the great masters in the area that I work in, which is anamorphism. He's one of the founding fathers, so it's inspired by him. But it looks at that idea of death because so much of our beliefs are centered around the idea of death and what happens after you die, and so much religion and science start to talk about it. And is it a binary event, or is it something that you just flow into? Because there are not many kind of binary, all of life seems to be fluid in a way. So what's that transition? I'm trying to verbalize with something that I can't verbalize and that I've expressed. I'm just going to share it with you because it talks to what you're on about. That's it.
It's an extraordinary piece, and I love but I love that it's asking a question like that it's asking like that when you talk about transition. That's a beautiful moment, because on the one hand, that's what I love about your work, actually, Jonty, is the poetic that sits underneath it. So there's the physical extraordinariness of it, but then there's this poetic thing where you're actually asking a very deep question. And it's how you try, and I think, well, it sounds like exactly what you're saying. It's you transitioning, like maybe it's always there, maybe it's always in this disordered state, death, and it becomes ordered in that moment.
Exactly.
Exactly.
It's like maybe the life is the disorder and the death is the ordering of it, or at what point does order become chaos? How do they interact with each other? And
I love that, because it's a beautiful frame.
And also, sorry. So, okay, Anyway, you get the vibe.
I love that, and I also, that's actually just on a pure aesthetic thing. The way those works look when they're not seen from the right point of view is also quite extraordinary, because you feel like you're looking at something that's I love this word, pre-existent. Like in physics, it has no meaning, but there's a place between something existing and something not existing, or something not existing and then existing. And I think your work, your work is exploring that space for me, Jonty. It's exploring that space between something not being it and then transitioning into becoming. And it's such a deep, idea, it's.
But both of us are like that, Steve, and that's what's amazing. Like just doing a circle on our childhood and what brought us to this point. Your work is the same. Your work, I mean, I come back to your chaos machine, and it's so beautifully opposite, where there's apparent order, and then at some point it just explodes into chaos, like this pre-existing chaos that's implicit in the system that doesn't appear to be there until it absolutely explodes into chaos. And in a way, I suppose my work is the opposite, this pre-existing chaos which explodes into order at some crazy point, you know.
So we're both exploring the same area. I think we both, I like to think we're both philosophers at heart. We both want to try to understand these, you know, like that's ultimately what we're trying to do, is like, it's, you can't ask all the questions you really want to ask as a scientist, because it has a science by its own admission, and that's the beauty of science, has borders around it. You know, like there's certain places you cannot go because they're not observable necessarily at the moment. But as an artist, you can go there. You can ask these questions, and then you can find some kind of resonance in science. Should I put up a picture of a video of one of those of the chaos machine, just for?
Oh, definitely. We've been talking about it so much. It's
Yeah, I certainly thought I should actually just put it up there. Share screen. And while I'm doing that, my sister Jo has just asked a question. Ask Jonty, now this is going to be one of my sister's texts, which might not make any sense. Ask Jonty if he works his art from end to beginning rather than pop way around. I think my sister's trying to say rather than the other way around. Is that so? I'm not sure what the
yes, you know, I think I get it. Where's the beginning and the end?
Yeah.
Where's the beginning and where's the end? Sure, it's a great question. I don't actually know the answer, because I'm not sure what the beginning and the end of the work is. It's a great question.
Yeah,
absolutely great question.
So thanks, Jo. And unfortunately, I can't see the YouTube, so I can't see if any questions coming up. But I'm going to put this video up. This is my machine behaving. Oh, it's gone. It's going to try again. Share screen. Okay, share. All right. So this, can you see it there?
Yeah.
All right. I think this is a little video. This is one part of the machine. And I'll tell you why this is so fascinating to me at the moment. Because this is the ordered part. This is the very not chaotic part.
Yeah.
But what it's done, I was going to pause it here. What it's done, when I was talking about can order, like, you know, when you think of things that are regimental and very rigid, they become predictable, right? That's what order is. But this highly ordered machine produced this composition on the left here, which is like what I would call, if I was an artist, well, I am an artist, but I would never be able to draw such a sophisticated composition. But it did that by the ordered process, rearranging its environment and becoming partly chaotic, and then reverting to order, and then making what I call a machine composition. You know, an unpredictable machine composition, which I could never conceive of. So that's when I see things like that, I have essentially a religious epiphany. It's like, yeah, we have a highly ordered system in the universe, but yet, and maybe that's it. An idea is a perfect thing. But the moment you take your idea and you put it in the world, it takes on a mind of its own, and it becomes unpredictable. It becomes chaotic, but in a transition, in a moment, before it becomes completely chaotic, hopefully something beautiful like us can emerge, you know? And that's part of what the question is that go around in my head, which I think I can ask as an artist, but I struggle to ask as a scientist.
But you know what? I mean, I look at that, and sometimes it's really hard to explain concepts, and then you manifest those concepts in some kind of visual. I'm going to use the word manifestation again. Can you manifest something into a manifestation? But
you can,
and so you look at that graphic you did of this order and chaos turning into order, turning into chaos, turning into order, and somehow some picture coming out of it. And in a way, maybe that explains the Big Bang. Maybe that explains, in some way, that's a visual to explain how human intelligence emerged. Just like this crazy coming together of things which shouldn't necessarily have come together to form some kind of like temporal order that we're living now.
And probably so transient. Like we experience our lives as these long things, but it's probably so transient, you know? And what always blows my mind is, you know, yeah, we are sitting and we're moving our hands and words are coming out of our mouth in some sort of reasonably predictable way. And in ourselves at any given time, to allow this to happen, is this insanely frenetic activity of the millions of cells frantically making lots and lots of products and moving around and burning energy just to allow this word that I just said now to come out of my mouth, which just seems like, I don't know if that's a waste of energy. It's like it's a lot of work
It's a huge
to get
amount
this
of
out.
energy.
Maybe you're right about burning the sun, because it makes that kind, and the fact that we don't burn up, combust in a second with this amount of heat that is being contained and directed and reorganized, it's extraordinary. So, you know, anything out, it's kind of mind-blowing. It's kind of mind-blowing.
Steve, it's so lovely to be sitting, having, my daughter calls them DMCs, deep, meaningful chats. It's so wonderful to be sitting, having a DMC with you.
Oh, it's just too great.
35 years later.
Yeah,
This is so
yeah, it's actually too great. It's actually too great, you know? It's like so amazing. Yeah, I mean, John, we've been talking for an hour, and I'm quite strict about that. They must not go for longer than an hour. But I want to think of a way to, because your work is also, it is, yeah, it's completely inspiring to me, because I always watch it and I see, you know, the way it emerges, the way you ask these questions, the way it then becomes these, and they always, the thing with your work, they always epiphanies. They feel like epiphanies, you know? It's like, you know, a lot of artists work by bits come out, some a bit noisy, bits come out. And I think I'm one of those artists, and I love that about my practice. I'm completely convinced by it, but that is how it works. It's like experiments, trial, error. It's asking questions, it's roundabouts, dead ends. It's all about that. And I'm happy with that. But your work is epiphanous. And I don't mean to put pressure on you, because it's also the way you are. I mean, the way you are is this, you know, you like your mind is just this amazing thing. It's you know, I remember all those years ago when you got it, your eyes lit up. They light up when you get excited about an idea, and that's always been like that. I remember walking in the Drakensberg with you and Hilton and a couple of others, and I remember you getting ideas about, you were playing the guitar at that point. I remember you just getting these ideas about music, and you just would light up, and there'd just be this extraordinary energy around the way you thought about the world, and it's always beautifully inspiring. So what is amazing is you found this vehicle. Like, you've actually, all those years ago when you were an engineer and then you weren't an engineer, and you walked into a museum and you had an epiphany. You have epiphanies, but you're able to translate those epiphanies into actual things. And that is an extraordinary thing. I have mild epiphanies as well, but then they don't necessarily become the thing. They become something else. But that's what's incredible about you. They become...
No. Come on.
No,
Look at that chaos.
No, but you know what I mean? I don't even mean that as a negative. I mean, that is the way it works. I remember, even as a scientist, I'd get this incredible idea about an experiment I would do. I would sort of do it wrong, and then I'd get this amazing other result. I'm my own serendipity machine, you know?
You're a perfect serendipity machine.
It comes back around. You know what? It's all feedback. It comes around, and what did I do? Oh, let's see if that means something. And, you know, it's a way of inquiry. But Jonty, thank you so much. I don't know if you want to say anything to round up, but I've just so loved having you here. And it's just, yeah, it's just beyond. I'm sure people watching this, those that know you, it's just great to see you again. And those that don't, please Google the art of Jonty Hurwitz. Okay. When I post this, I'll put a link to your website. Also, just to get started, you can go to TED, have a look at his Stuttgart, his TED Talk, Stuttgart. Well, just Google Jonty Hurwitz. It's gonna, I mean, the internet generally floods when you Google that name. So John, I'm gonna let you just say the last few words there, because I can go on.
So I just want to say that it's been the most beautiful, spiritual, amazing closing of one circle, and we've got many circles left, but just to share what an influence you've been on me, and we've been on each other, and it's really hard to say how warm my heart feels right now on so many levels, Steve, and thank you.
Oh, lots of love, Jonty. Lots and lots of love, eh? Yeah, too many more whatevers, but there will be more. Lots of love. All right. Take care of yourself, family. We'll talk soon. Cheers.
Bye.